push the pace here. Switch on the inside. Gray had Heisel Soder on her. She turns and
The phone call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday night in September, and Clark knew from the tremor in her daughter's voice that something was terribly wrong. For there are moments in a parent's life when instinct speaks louder than words, and this was one of them, as she sat up in bed with her heart pounding and whispered, "Baby, what's wrong?" Only to hear Caitlin, America's most scrutinized athlete and the face of a new generation of women's basketball, murmur through tears, "I can't do this anymore, Mom. They want me to fail. I can feel it every single day." And those words pierced and like a blade, because this was not the confident, fiery child who had spent countless nights in their West Des Moines driveway shooting baskets until her hands were raw, nor the fearless competitor who had stood tall against double teams and hostile crowds, but a broken young woman, her spirit fraying under the weight of expectations and relentless criticism. And as Anne listened to her daughter's voice crack through sobs, she thought back to the little girl who used to crawl into her parents' bed during thunderstorms, clutching her blanket, trembling until her mother's arms reminded her she was safe. And what the public did not know, hidden behind Caitlin's record-breaking rookie season, sold-out arenas, and steady post-game interviews, was the immense private struggle that had been simmering beneath the surface for months. An unrelenting storm of scrutiny, judgment, and harassment that no 22-year-old should have to endure, and, though not surprised, felt the crushing reality of it in that moment, for she had quietly been screenshotting the vile messages, cataloging the threats, and lying awake at night, not only as a mother but as a woman who understood the cruelty of a world that punishes brilliance when it comes from those expected to remain quiet. And so she asked Caitlin gently to tell her what had happened that day, bracing herself for the answer, and Caitlin's trembling words revealed the latest blow. After missing 2 games with a groin injury, she had returned not only to physical pain but to a torrent of insults questioning her toughness, her commitment, even her right to be considered the future of women's basketball. And to make matters worse, she confessed in a whisper. Some fans had actually cheered when she got hurt, a cruelty that stripped away even the illusion of unconditional support, and closed her eyes against the darkness of her bedroom, aching for her child who had given so much of herself to inspire others, only to feel betrayed by the very audience she sought to uplift, and reminded her of an old memory, one from their kitchen when Caitlin had been 8 years old, crying after a boy at school told her girls couldn't play basketball, and through her tears she had declared she would prove him wrong by becoming the best player in the world, and it had told her then that people who tried to limit others were only afraid of their own limitations, and that being great was never about what others thought but about what you believed about yourself. And now, years later, she repeated those words with quiet strength, but instead of following them with reassurance alone, she chose honesty, admitting something she had never told Caitlin before. "I've been keeping track of everything they say about you, and I need you to know that I'm scared too." And that confession shifted the entire conversation because Caitlin had never heard her mother admit fear about her career. And when Anne continued, her voice trembling, "I'm terrified, not because I think you can't handle it, but because I see what it's doing to you. I see my daughter disappearing behind this armor she's had to build." Caitlin fell silent, focusing not on her own pain but on her mother's vulnerability, and suddenly the distance between Indianapolis and West Des Moines dissolved as they entered a rare space of mutual honesty, 2 women laying down their armor in the middle of the night. And Caitlin whispered the fear she had buried deepest. "Mom, sometimes I lie awake wondering if it would be easier if I just wasn't good at basketball. If I was just average, maybe people would leave me alone." A confession that made Anne's heart ache, because this was the same girl who had once dreamed of inspiring others, who had said she wanted every little girl in the stands to believe she could be great because Caitlin had proven it was possible. And so, and with her voice breaking, told her, "Baby, when I watch you play, I don't just see my daughter. I see every child in the stands who dares to dream because you lit that fire. I see every parent who drives their child to practice believing it matters because you made it matter. And I see every woman who was told she wasn't enough but found strength in your courage." And in that moment, Caitlin let out a sob that seemed to release months of unspoken pain, and finally spoke aloud the fear and pride that had been warring inside her. Their conversation stretched until sunrise, weaving through stories of Caitlin's childhood determination, the college nights she played through exhaustion, the joy she used to radiate, and the way fame had twisted her dream into a stage where every misstep was magnified and every triumph dissected. But within that raw exchange, something shifted, for vulnerability became their strength, honesty became their armor, and love became their strategy against a world eager to see Caitlin stumble. And as the morning light crept through Anne's curtains, Caitlin whispered, "Maybe I don't have to be perfect all the time." And Anne, with tears on her cheeks, replied, "Sweetheart, perfection was never the goal. Impact is, and you've already achieved that 1,000 times over." And in that fragile dawn, both mother and daughter discovered that the true meaning of success was not found in trophies, contracts, or headlines, but in the courage to keep going when the weight of expectation feels unbearable, in the humility to admit fear, and in the love that refuses to let darkness have the final word. And though the world would go on seeing only the poised young star on the court, those who truly knew Caitlin would forever remember that night when she finally allowed herself
Down to Gumbawale and that beautiful little fader in the lane. And they didn't handle the aggressive attack that the Wings came out with in the third quarter.
Yeah, the Aces had 10 turnovers.
The phone call that Anne Clark received at 2:47 a.m. on a quiet Tuesday night in September would change everything, not because she had not already suspected that her daughter was struggling, but because for the first time Caitlin allowed the facade of strength to crumble and admitted that she was drowning beneath the weight of expectation, scrutiny, and relentless criticism. And as Anne sat upright in bed, clutching the phone to her ear, her heart thudding against her ribs, she heard her daughter's trembling voice say, "I can't do this anymore, Mom. They want me to fail. I can feel it every single day." Words that tore through her like glass because she had always seen Caitlin as the fiery competitor who played through exhaustion, who thrived under pressure, who smiled even when opponents tried to rough her up. Yet in this moment there was no armor, only the frightened cadence of a young woman burdened by the impossible demand to be perfect, to live up to the label of savior. For women's basketball, to prove herself not just as a great athlete, but as a cultural figure whose every move was dissected and debated, and instinctively thought back to the countless evenings when Caitlin, as a little girl, had shot hoops in the driveway until her hands were blistered, her breath visible in the Iowa winter air, the joy in her eyes unmistakable as she declared that she wanted to play on the biggest stage. Yet what the world saw now, sold-out arenas, television interviews, the glow of sponsorships and headlines, hid the truth that somewhere along the way that joy had been swallowed by expectation, leaving behind not a free spirit, but a performer trapped in a golden cage, and whose instincts as a mother had long sensed this erosion of joy, tried to steady her own voice and coax her daughter to share what was happening. And Caitlin revealed that after missing 2 games with a groin injury, she had not only faced physical discomfort but had returned to jeers, whispers that she was fragile, and even cheers from some when she sat out. An almost medieval cruelty that left her questioning whether her hard work and sacrifice had ever really mattered to those who claimed to adore her. And as she confessed this, Anne's heart ached with the memory of an earlier conversation she had shared with her husband Brent just days before, when he had sat at the kitchen table, voice heavy, saying, "She's not the same person," and the joy is gone from her eyes when she talks about the game. And though Anne had agreed with him, she had also seen a deeper struggle, not merely against external critics, but against an inner fracture, the widening gap between who Caitlin thought she was supposed to be, the flawless superstar, the beacon of hope, and who she truly was, a 22-year-old woman still searching for balance between ambition and authenticity. And so Anne asked her daughter gently that night, "Do you remember why you started playing basketball in the first place?" And Caitlin, without hesitation, replied, "Because it was fun, because I loved the sound of the ball going through the net." Yet when her mother followed with, "And when was the last time you played just for fun?" the silence that stretched between them was answer enough. For Caitlin could not recall the last time she had held a basketball without feeling the heavy gaze of cameras, critics, or statisticians, and this silence became the seed of a turning point. For within a week, she surprised even herself by driving alone to a public park in Indianapolis, walking onto an empty court with no coaches, no fans, no expectations, just her and a ball, and spending 2 hours shooting, dribbling, laughing at her own misses, rediscovering the rhythm of why she had ever fallen in love with this game, later telling her mother, "It was the first time in months I remembered why I love basketball, not because I'm good at it, not because it's my job, but because it makes me feel alive." And this rediscovery rippled into every corner of her life as she began setting boundaries with media, choosing only interviews that would nourish rather than drain her, working with a sports psychologist not because she felt broken, but because she wanted to protect her mental health with the same dedication she gave her physical training, and most importantly, beginning to share her struggles openly, reframing vulnerability not as weakness, but as the bedrock of real strength, saying to reporters, "When we pretend we're not affected by criticism or pressure, we're not being strong. We're just being dishonest." And this honesty sparked a wave of response that no one, not even Caitlin, could have predicted, as athletes across sports came forward to admit their own battles with pressure. Parents wrote to thank her for showing their children that greatness could coexist with fragility, and young girls sent letters telling her that seeing their hero acknowledge struggle made them feel less alone. And among these was one letter that moved her to tears, handwritten from Phoenix, by a mother whose daughter had quit basketball after being bullied by teammates and coaches, only to pick up the sport again after hearing Caitlin's honesty, writing, "If Caitlin Clark can be brave enough to admit she struggles, then maybe it's okay for my daughter to struggle too." A message that encapsulated the transformative power of Caitlin's choice to lead with authenticity. And 6 months after that fateful late-night phone call, she and sat together in the stands at a high school gym in Iowa watching teenage girls play with unrestrained joy, the squeak of trainers on the court, the laughter, the boldness of long-range shots reminiscent of Caitlin herself, and asked softly, "Do you regret any of it?"